Welcome to Passive Aggressive Income. This program may contain strong language. The content may not be suitable for audiences under the age of 17. We understand many of our listeners may not agree with all of our personal viewpoints. We in no way, shape, or form mean to be offensive to anyone. Our show notes will provide all of our source material included for each episode. Now let's get passive aggressive. Welcome back to another episode of Passive Aggressive Income. I am Mims and I'm here with Lexie, and she will be taking the reins of this episode. She will be talking about a really important and fun topic. So I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Mims. Today I'm going to be talking about how you deal with issues in the workplace. If you've made a mistake or there's like just a problem, basically, it doesn't matter like how much of a professional you are or how good of an entrepreneur you are, you're just bound to have to put out some fires every once in a while. And it really doesn't make you bad at what you do. It's just life. Mistakes happen. And but how you choose to respond to that, to an unhappy client, to an issue at work, really can make all the difference. So, in this episode, I'm going to talk about how to best handle unhappy clients and problems at work. As a side note, this episode pairs really well with episode 55, where I talked about how to maintain your professional relationships. So, I would also suggest going to check out that one if you haven't listened to it already.
I feel like I really need this because I tend to beat myself up when it comes to
Mhm.
mistakes that I make. Even though we're all human and it's bound to happen, I'm not going to do everything perfectly. I have it in my mind that there's other people that just do their jobs flawlessly. They never do anything wrong. So this is going to be a really good episode, especially for me.
Yeah. And I think it's natural to be, people are going to celebrate their accomplishments and they're going to talk about what they did well, but there's, things that happen behind the scenes that you're probably not hearing about. And even the most like put together person is going to fuck up sometimes. Like that's just life and it's okay. It
Yeah.
really is, but you have to handle it in a way that makes the client or the other person feel like it's okay too.
Hmm.
Let's just kind of go step by step in each stage of when a problem is happening. So when the problem actually occurs, maybe you made a promise to a client that you can't keep, and now you're in a situation where you have to tell them that what they want isn't possible. Or maybe you were working on a website for them and that website is down and you need to come up with a solution ASAP so they don't lose business. Or maybe you and the client have creative differences and you need to work through a solution that all parties can agree on and be happy with. Or, as another example, maybe you didn't even know there was a problem and they're coming to you with a complaint about something and you need to figure out how to handle this when you might be caught off guard. So, here's a step by step process of what this looks like when, like, sort of how you should handle when a problem is occurring. So, as soon as you know that there's an issue that you can't just immediately resolve, you need to let the client know. Communication is so key. So, step one, summarize what the problem is and how you discovered it, or if they're bringing it to you, then you can ask follow-up questions and make sure you know what the problem is so you can best figure out how to resolve it. And then step two, explain to them what parts of their business, if any, the issue is impacting. And then also just be honest on how severe that problem is. What is it affecting? And step three, give an overview of how you will troubleshoot the problem so they're aware of you actually taking steps to address it. Step four, if possible, give them a timeline on when the problem will be resolved. So again, they don't feel like they have no information. You're keeping them updated. And step four, when the problem occurs, assure them that you will give them updates throughout the process so they're not left in the dark. And moving on to working to resolve the problem. So now that they're aware of what the problem is, you've communicated with them sort of what to expect and how you're going to let them know as you progress through trying to resolve this issue. Now you're trying to resolve it actually. So, whatever the situation is, how you communicate and handle that situation can really make or break your relationship with that client. It can affect how successful your business is, whether you get referrals or not, and it can really greatly impact how trusting that person is in you and your work for the future and if they want to continue working with you or not.
Hmm.
So, like I said before, always, always, always communicate every step of the way. Like, if you take nothing else from this episode, just know that you should be talking with the client constantly so they're aware of what steps you're taking to make it right. So, first, you want to reassure them that you can handle it and that you will do your best to find a solution. And if you need to bring in outside help to aid you in resolving the problem faster, then do that. You don't need to take it on all by yourself. And if it's a problem that you caused, you should be taking ownership for that and you should apologize. That can be hard because you don't want to like admit that you did something wrong and you want to like keep a good image. You want them to have a good image of you in their mind, but if it's pretty obvious that you caused this problem and you're just not taking ownership of it, then it's really going to have a negative effect on them. They're not going to see you in a positive light.
Yeah, it's almost worse to just be like, yeah, I don't know what happened, or it's kind of
Mhm.
out of my hands. And when it's blatantly like something that you did, I rather somebody say, you know what, I must have missed this or that, and I'm
Mhm.
so sorry, but I am gonna fix it, and it's gonna be exactly what you want, rather than just shifting the blame, because then I'm just gonna get even more pissed.
Exactly. And people can see right through that. Like you're not actually fooling anybody.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I also want to just say like you really should stay level-headed throughout this too. Like I said, if the person is blaming you, like that can be really hard. You don't necessarily want to take ownership, especially if it was a problem that other people were involved in and it's not just on
Mm,
you. It can be easy to lash out in anger and get really emotional. But if you do, the client's going to remember that. They're going to remember how you reacted in an emotional way. And
right.
you have to keep in mind this is business, it's not personal. So you need to keep your emotions in check.
Hmm.
So that's sort of like working through getting the problem resolved. And then when the problem is actually resolved, it's a good idea to ask for feedback on like what you could have done better or like, is there anything that you wish I would have done throughout this process? Or, I've learned a lot from this problem happening and I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again by doing XYZ, but is there anything else that you would like to see from me in the future? It can be hard
Mm.
to take criticism. It's not easy, but it is really valuable to know what you did right and what you did wrong and how you can improve from the client side if you want to keep working with them.
Also, if they're just being shitty towards you, like, well, you shouldn't have been so dumb about this or whatever, just something extreme like that. I don't take that, like
Mhm.
you don't have to take that in and internalize that because they're just being abusive at that point. So if
For
it's
sure.
constructive, then just be like, okay, I can learn from this. They're being positive and at least we can move forward. But if they're just
Mhm.
being like an asshole, then don't take that home with you.
Yeah, for sure. And even if they do offer advice and you're just like, I really don't agree with that process, like you can ask for their feedback, but it doesn't necessarily mean you need to take it. Definitely
Hmm.
consider it, mull it over. But if it's something that you feel like isn't right or that doesn't work for you, you don't need to do it just because they said so.
Right.
But yeah, like when mistakes like this happen, it really is a learning opportunity. I know that's kind of cliche, but it's true. And this will allow you to understand how not to repeat the problem in the future. And if it does happen again, you now can handle it with grace because you've been through it.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of it, you want to evaluate your own actions and take note if you wish you would have done something differently. So you can, stop doing that again in the future and then feel good about what you did do right because handling a problem is not easy, especially when it feels like there's a lot on the line because it's your business or your employment. So also take into mind that like you did do things right and you handled it the best that you could.
Yes.
And lastly, you want to think about the future. So you may realize that this isn't a client that you want to continue working with. Maybe this is just such a bad experience that you're like, no, thank you. I have learned if I take anything away from this experience, I've learned that I don't want to work with you anymore because that was awful. And that's
Right.
okay. So make sure you take the time to be introspective about what's best for you and your business. And just because that client may be bringing you in money doesn't mean that it's best for you and your business in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to go through a couple of personal examples. Two examples. One will be through my business when I wish that I would have done a lot of things differently, and I wish that I would have handled some things a bit better. And the second is a kind of a recent example because I get a lot of these podcast episode ideas from my real life experiences, and this just happened to me this week. So I'm going to talk about a problem that arose at my internship that I've been working at for the past couple months. And I feel like I handled it really well. So I'm going to kind of talk through what happened with that. But yeah, like our episode last week when Mims was talking about scams going on, and it's just kind of hard to talk about when you feel like you've made a mistake and when you could have done something differently. But what Mims and I are trying to do on this podcast is be honest and talk about our own experiences so people can avoid making the same mistakes for themselves. So it is hard to talk about like when you kind of fucked up, but that's what we're here for, and we're going to be honest about it.
Exactly.
So, a couple years ago, I had just landed a new client, and I was going to completely redo their website, which they had sort of thrown together themselves and like was just pretty bad. And the plan was to take all new photos for them, edit their existing web copy, lock in their branding, and just create a more modern looking website. And they had a specific budget to start. So we'll call that phase one. So we talked through what changes phase one would include, what pages they wanted, editing all the verbiage that they had on the website, taking some things out to make it a little bit cleaner and more readable. And then they wanted to utilize the photos that they provided for the time being. So I edited those and then I got to work. So after getting the initial bones of how the website would look and how it would be structured, we had another meeting to discuss what progress I was making, where we were at with the budget, what still needed to be done, etc. And during this meeting, they decided they wanted to change a lot of their original ideas. So I was like, okay, new plan, let's get to work. And then I went through the whole process and they just continued to change their minds about what they wanted, how they wanted to sell their product, what pages they wanted. And it just felt like a lot of back and forth where like I would start on one thing and then be like, you know what, never mind, I don't want to do that anymore. Let's try this instead. And I was trying to keep up with it, but I realized that they didn't really know what they wanted and they didn't know what
Mm.
they needed in a website. And we were going to go over budget. So I set up a meeting to talk about budget and all the different things that they were asking for. And guess what? It didn't go well.
Oh no.
Yeah. So they were upset that I didn't have a finished, ready to go product for them for phase one by the time that I had reached their budget. And I kind of had to explain to them that the original scope of the project had changed drastically throughout this whole process. And so when they were asking for a bunch of new features and changes, we hadn't factored those things into the budget. And so I was spending time on things that they asked of me, but maybe it shouldn't have been in the original, like this phase one. Maybe those are things we could have added later. So they were unhappy because they had met their budget and we didn't have a working product. I was unhappy because I was just trying to do what they asked for and I felt like I couldn't win. And so eventually I ended up getting them a somewhat working product and they realized they really didn't know what they wanted from a website. So they said they would take some time to think things over and maybe use my product as sort of like a reference for how they want it to move forward. And if they did want to continue working with me in the process of like making their website, then they would reach out to me. So that was a lot.
Yeah, that sounds awful. Oh
It
my God.
was. It was really stressful. And I was so excited because this was going to be like a really big ongoing project for me. And like I really enjoyed doing the website stuff. And we were going to do photos and going to do all these things. And it just went so poorly.
Right.
So I did learn a lot. And that's sort of the point of this episode is to talk about like what things I could have done differently to prevent like a shit show like this happening
Mm.
and to prevent that happening in the future too. So, what did I learn? I learned that we should have had a way more in-depth initial meeting so I could better gauge how thought out their vision for their website was and figure out if what they were telling me they wanted actually was what they wanted and that they were set in stone with their decisions before I even got started and spent any money or spent any time, which was spending more money to work on their website. And then when things started changing, I should have been more communicative about how costly those changes would be because a lot of times clients will ask for something and they'll think it's just a small change, but it could
Mm,
really be a very large change that's going to be super time consuming. And if you don't tell them that that's the case, then they might be like, wait, whoa, that took you 5 hours. That should have been like a 2-minute fix. But you didn't
right,
communicate that with them. So now you've just spent a bunch of their money that they're like, well, if I had known it was going to take 5 hours, I wouldn't have asked for that. So you got to
right,
communicate about it.
right.
And then I also just should have been more proactive about giving incremental updates throughout the process. I figured, all right, let's do an initial check-in. And then once we get started, I can sort of show the prototype and for phase one, and that should be good enough, right? But it's not. I should have shown them all of the small changes, and if we did agree on something that they asked, then I should have shown, be like, hey, is this what you had in mind? This is what we have so far, and just continue to check in with them throughout the process because that could have prevented a lot of wasted time changing things that I had already finished.
Right.
And lastly, it helped me realize that not all clients are good ones. Just because
Mm,
I'm making money doesn't mean a project is worthy of doing it. And even if they had come back asking me to do another phase of their website, which they didn't, I would have declined because we just didn't work well together and it wasn't a good fit.
whatever happened to their website? Is it different now? Is it up and running?
So I looked at it as I was preparing for this episode. I went and looked at it, and it seems like it's different than it used to be. It's not great. So I'm wondering if
Oh,
they sort of like refactored it themselves.
mm,
And a lot of their things that they wanted to implement in the future were not implemented. So they have a sort of customized, large and expensive product that they aren't actually selling on their website. It's just sort of a place where you can see all the information, and they're still asking for emails to inquire, and if you want to purchase them, like communicate with them through email. So that was something that it was sort of a point of contention when we were working together because it was difficult to set up a shop where you're not actually selling products, but like they want
mm,
to in the future. And so it was just like it was kind of confusing because they didn't really know what they wanted. They weren't
yeah.
set up to be selling their product online yet. And this was several years ago, so it seems like nothing really has changed
Mm,
with that, which
right,
is kind of
right.
unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, it's okay. It looks a little better than it did, but it could use some love. But I noticed some of my pictures that they sent me that I edited, they're using. So, like, that's cool.
Okay.
At least there's that. I had some
Yeah.
sort of impact. But yeah, it's definitely not the website I designed for them. So next example, again, it's kind of hard to talk about when things go wrong, especially when it is kind of fresh. Like I said, this happened to me literally just this week, like
Mhm.
Friday, as I was leaving work, I was sort of putting out the fire. So I work as a software developer intern for an engineering consulting company. And for one of my projects, I redid a website where engineers within the company can sign up to receive emails about different trainings. So when you sign up for a training, you're put into a group where you get these email notifications, and that way they can, like learn within the company. And
Right.
basically, all I had to do was make the app look better, and then I added a new training sign up. So it went through testing and it went live on the company website. All said and done, super easy. And then the next day, my project manager received a forwarded email chain that the website was not showing that people were signed up for their trainings. So you should be able to go back to the website and see which groups you're in. And it wasn't showing that. It was showing that no one was in any groups. So he forwarded it to me, and then immediately I dropped everything to go take a look and see what the issue was. And I was trying to like orient myself within the app and try and figure out if this was just like a display issue or if everyone had actually been removed from the groups. And while I was just like, had just started digging into things, the client actually walked over to my desk and he was kind of panicked and he was like, you need to know how serious this situation is. Thousands of people within the company are signed up for all sorts of different trainings, and we don't keep record of who's in what. Like this website does that. And he wasn't really like letting me get a word in. And I was panicking a little bit because I had never had to like put out a fire at this
Oh
job.
my
And
God.
like I didn't really know what the problem was yet. So um yeah, he's like, you can't just like push your code straight into production. Like it needs to go through testing. It did go through testing. It just got missed. And yeah, so I was feeling kind of panicky. And instead of getting emotional about the situation, I just kind of like took a deep breath and put myself in his shoes. And I'm like, I know that he's stressed because this could reflect badly on him. And
Mm,
he might be kind of like emotional right now a little bit, but that's okay. I don't need to take that in. It's not a personal thing. He's just stressed about his job. And so I let him say everything that he needed to, let him get it all out, telling me how important it was. Like, yes, I know. And then once he asked me some questions, I followed these steps, which we kind of talked about earlier. But to give an example of a real life situation, first I told him what I knew about the problem. I went through and diagnosed what the issue was in front of him, showed
mm,
people were still all in the training groups. So it was just displaying that they weren't, but like everyone was still where they needed to be. They should still be receiving notifications about the trainings. It's okay. It's not like a back end issue. It's going to be fine. And then I told him that I was making this my number one priority and I would keep him updated on my progress as I figured out what was going on and tried to make the fix. So I immediately hopped on a call with my supervisor who was working from home that day and had him help me with the necessary changes because I'm like, okay, this is time sensitive. I have to leave in like 2 hours. So I want to make sure that this is done before I leave for the weekend. And then, yeah, so I asked for help and had him help me with the changes. And then throughout that whole process, I was sending the client messages on Teams, letting him know I found what the problem was, that it was going through testing, and then I notified him when it went live. So I did end up fixing the problem right before my shift ended, and I told him, hey, I have to run right now. But if you have any immediate questions or concerns, you can contact this person. Otherwise, if you want to talk more and have any remaining questions, I'll be available Monday morning. And so he asked me a question through Teams, which is like, hey, like I gotta run because I'm not allowed to work more than 40 hours as an
oh,
intern. So like I literally have to go, but so which is why I referred him to someone else. But he started asking me questions. So I'm like, you know what? It's fine. I'll stay. I'll make sure he's good to go.
right.
And then walked out of work a few minutes late, but it's not that big of a deal because he felt assured that things were better. It was tested, things were okay. So it was all good. And then I went over to my project manager who had initially told me about the problem. And then I started a conversation on how can we avoid things like this happening in the future. I don't want things like this to slip through the cracks. And like, what could I have done better before the problem happened? And then how did I handle it from your eyes? And I think that was really appreciated
Mm,
because I was showing that I cared about the problem and I wanted to do better in the future so this didn't happen again. So,
right.
what I learned from this experience was even though I left work completely emotionally drained, and this was just a half day too, like I worked
Oh my
4 hours and
gosh.
it was like one of my hardest days at work. And I just kind of like felt bad, even though it wasn't really my fault this happened. Like none of us, anyone who, like me, my supervisor, my project manager, the testers, no one caught this problem.
Mm,
But yeah, so like I felt bad, but I knew it wasn't really my fault. But I did feel good about how I handled an unexpected problem like this happening. I know that I communicated well through every step of the process. I kept my emotions in check. I followed up to make sure the client was that he always had a point of contact. I asked for help to solve the problem faster, and I showed that I cared about my work and preventing mistakes like this happening in the future because I asked for feedback once it was all over.
Yeah, I think what you did made the client feel more secure. If you would have been like, why are you getting so upset with me? This wasn't my fault. It went
Right.
through testing. Like, I did the best I could. If you just came
Mhm.
at him with an emotional response, like a defensive response,
Right.
it may have been escalated to a different uh,
Hmm.
outcome.
Yep.
But I think that implementing what you're saying in this episode really saved you and the client that headache of just fighting and
Yeah.
not resolving it in a professional way.
Hmm. Yeah, and like not making excuses, just being like, okay, this is a problem, like let's handle it. And this is a
Mm.
client that I'm doing more than one project for too, so I knew that this
Oh,
was really critical for me to handle it in a way that he would be happy with and that everyone involved would feel good about because
right.
like I said, like I'm going to be doing other things for him. And I've done a way bigger project for him that's currently going through testing. So I knew that like developing these relationships, especially because if I do stay on full time after my internship ends, I'm going to be working with this person for maybe
Mm.
years to come. So it's good to like have a very good first impression when things go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, lastly, we're just going to go through some of the takeaways from this episode. Problems are always going to arise in business. That's just a part of life. And by communicating well, by being genuine and caring, by pulling in other people to assist with problem solving, and not letting your negative emotions show, trying to find timely solutions, you actually can build more trust with your clients or your coworkers or your boss than if everything had just gone smoothly and a problem never showed up in the first place. Life is all about how you react to things that happen. It can make or break your client relationships, your professional success, and ultimately how much money you can make. So remember to stay level-headed and communicate.
Yeah. And I think this is obviously perfect for a professional environment, but just in general, like just being
Mhm.
level-headed, and if you do mess up in like a personal relationship as well, like it's owning your shit is always the way to go no matter what environment you're in. So, yes, this is a really great episode, and just putting yourself out there like I did in the last episode is hard, so I applaud you for doing so.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. But we are honest on this podcast, and we're going to talk about all the highs and lows in life and on our journeys to how we got to this point. So, thank you to our listeners for sticking around. And if you want to put yourself out there too, we would love to hear stories that you've had of how you've had to overcome issues in professional environments. And like if there's other tips that we didn't mention that you found works well for you, then please share those with us, either on YouTube or social media. We'd love to hear about it. Thank you guys for sticking with us, and we will see you again for another episode next Monday.
Bye.
Bye. Passive Aggressive Income was written, recorded, edited, and produced by co-hosts and creators Mims and Lexie. We truly want to thank our listeners, collaborators, friends, and family that continuously support us for all the love we receive. If you enjoy our show, please give us a glowing rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, follow us on Facebook and Instagram to see what we are up to. For any inquiries, please email passiveaggressiveincome2023@gmail.com. Episodes of Passive Aggressive Income are available wherever you listen to podcasts, so make sure to subscribe and like us on your favorite streaming platform.